Welcome to Our Pod, and by that I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are usually two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today we are very honored because we are three friends, and we are
best friends.
We are welcoming on Martha Wells, author of the Murderbot Diaries. Martha, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course,
Thanks
we really appreciate. Gosh, we covered Murderbot for our season 3 of the podcast, so we were so honored when we reached out to you and you said you would join us to discuss Murderbot and everything in between, and the new book coming out, System Collapse. So, but Martha, could you tell us a little bit about your journey as an author and what led you to become a writer, and like all of your moves through fantasy and into the sci-fi Murderbot series and everything?
I kind of always wanted to be a writer. When I was really young, was still trying to kind of create stories by drawing, things. And I was writing Godzilla fanfic for y'all are too young to remember, but these used to be these Godzilla cartoons and all these movies and stuff. They would show them on the one independent station. This was back when they only had like 5 channels on the TV. And, I just really got into that. And there was one station that showed all those movies and showed a lot of science fiction and fantasy stuff, or, the Irwin Allen kind of adventure things like Land of the Giants and I can't remember the name now, the submarine show, the science fictional submarine that went around. But so I don't know what made me want to do that. I just kind of always liked stories and always liked reading, and I tended to gravitate towards science fiction and fantasy. It was next to the children's section in the library we went to, and I think that it was also the only section where there were like a lot of women on the book covers in adventure fiction. Because back then it was really hard. There were a lot of girls, but they were, babysitters or the load kind of. And so I was always looking for female characters who were, doing something. They didn't have to be the hero, but at least, doing something, part of the group, as opposed to the hindrance for the group. I really didn't like that. So I don't know.
Trapped on like train tracks somewhere.
Yeah, trapped on train tracks, there to take care of the toddler they brought along for some reason, right, or something like that. Or just nagging everybody all the time about, well, you should go home and all that kind of stuff. Never like that.
We need to make dinner.
Yeah.
Laura and
drag. What a drag.
They would be on a desert island and the girl would end up being the mom. And it's like,
typical.
Yeah, very typical. So that's kind of why I got into it. And then when I went to, it was really, I started trying to write stories in high school and college and everything. And it wasn't really until I graduated that I started, I'd submitted a couple of things, but I didn't start writing a novel until after college, and was able to finish it in a writing workshop with Steve Gould and Laura Mixon, and ended up getting an agent and selling it. So it's been a very interesting up and down since then.
Well, you're a prolific writer. Like, you have so many works, and I think you were first published in like the 90s.
Yeah, 1993.
93. Yeah. And all the way through present day. So you have tons of work that have been coming out through the years, and it's super impressive. But for somebody like us that, we haven't gotten through like all of your work, so we haven't been able to read anything besides like your more recent stuff. How would you say that your work has changed throughout time, and how have you changed as a writer?
I think it's changed a lot. I think I'm a lot more conscious of gender. I think I'm just more thoughtful about things in general, just from, years of listening to people, talk about stuff. And when you grow up in the 70s, you have a kind of internalized misogyny that you don't really, I think it takes a long time to recognize that comes out in weird ways. And that's why I think in my earlier books, there'll be female characters as sometimes the main character or, kind of the second lead character, but just the array of all the other people in the book, I would tend to default to male because that's just, it's sort of ingrained in you. And in the 2000s, I was, especially like the mid 2000s, I was really trying to work on that and try to make my default female. And actually, I did that with my Star Wars novel. And so kind of started doing that. And it was really fun. And, I had to kind of really overcome this kind of internalized crap that you have that you don't know you have. You have to kind of figure it out that it's there in the first place, and then kind of work on it for years. So I think I've changed a lot in a lot of different ways, and that's it. I think when you read the books, if someone read the books in order, they would see a progression now.
I mean, you've done amazing work with gender, because I will say, like, we read through Murderbot, and something we talked about so often is like, you often hear and like people in criticism will be like, well, you're building this entire new world. Why are there only two genders? Like the world is so large. Why wouldn't you make a bigger world? And we were really impressed with like how often you seem to create different types of characters and different belief systems and everything. Like you just really, there is a wealth of knowledge in your novels. So
yeah, especially you realize that gender is cultural, and our perception of it is cultural almost entirely. So it's just really interesting to play with. And one thing I want to try to do, especially in fantasy fiction, is make my fantasy world at least as weird and interesting as like Earth is. and try to make it like that. That's hard because that's a lot of detail, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm going for.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I will say, like, you grew up in the 70s. We grew up in the early 2000s, which was very much the not like the other girls era. So you always made it male because it had to be one girl and she could only get along with all the other boys. Like,
had to be a tomboy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was not a fun period to go through.
No. Are there any other like themes you like to play? Like, I know we said gender and like building different worlds that are just as weird as Earth, but are there any like other themes that looking back you realize came up a lot in your works?
Probably dealing with trauma. I've been kind of thinking about that a lot, especially, starting with the pandemic. And how often my books do focus on characters who are kind of still processing their trauma or trying not to process their trauma and kind of doing it anyway. And how much my where I live and everything has affected my perception of things. I wrote a short story called The Salt Witch, which is based in, I used Galveston, which is Galveston Island, where we have gone for vacations and stuff since I was a little kid, as kind of a template for it. And also it's kind of a happy story about dying in a hurricane, because we have those a lot. And and someone had asked me about the layers of history, and that it's the visible layers of history in the story. And I was kind of surprised that that's not something everyone perceives. I guess it's where I live. It's so easy to see, all the history is still here. It's in the buildings that are left behind, but also in the people and the terrible things, the racism and the homophobia and the sexism and all those things, and how it's scarred people through, how that kind of pain is kind of passed down, and also the good things that are still there, and the way the different cultures combine here, and kind of have, the things that stay the same, the things that kind of produce their own sort of mini cultures. We've been a place where there was an Eastern European group called the Wends. I'm going to try to spell it. WENDT, I think. And they came over here pretty early on and tried to make a little enclave and to preserve their culture. And this is the only place in the world where they still are. But of course, their kids grew up and wanted to go off to college and go to different places. And so it got it didn't work out the way they wanted. But it's just all kinds of stuff like that is like around here. And it's really kind of affected, I think, the way I look at culture and look at the effect of time on the perception of time on cultures.
Well, I think it definitely shows through. Like, just hearing you say that, you pay attention. So you noticing these things about like your community and the place that you live, you're paying attention to what's going on around you, and you're seeing these themes in your real life, and it then translates onto your work because you can pick up on these things in your work. So it's great that you're able to pick up on these things in your real life, because I think a lot of us, kind of just go day to day, and we don't recognize some of these things. Like, oh, whoops, that happened again. And, we don't pay attention. So it's great to hear that someone like you is paying attention and then able to translate that into their art. So it's really refreshing. I have a question about, so we came into your work through the Murderbot Diaries, and now we're starting to get into some of your other books. Where's like a place that you're telling readers, if they've never read any of your work, where do you want them to start, or where do you direct them?
I would say either Witch King, or if they want something that's not as complicated, maybe is a good word, complicated and maybe slightly less murdery, as The Cloud Roads, which is the first book in the Books of the Raksura series. And if they like Murderbot, I think they'd like it, because it's not all non-human characters.
Ooh,
okay. And it's a secondary world fantasy with a lot of adventure and everything, kind of like Witch King, but with flying lizard people. So that would be, I think, a good place to start.
Well, and Witch King is complicated in the best way, because I was just telling Hannah that when I was reading it over the weekend, I zoomed through it, but it was one of those books where you're like, wait, who is this? And you're flipping back and you're looking at the map and you're like, okay, they're here now. So who is this guy? So it's complicated in the best way. So that's good to know that that's a good starting point. But you have some books that are being re-released.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that process was like for you, and what it was like to kind of sit with some of your work again?
It's my first 4 novels, which had all gone out of print in the 90s and very early 2000s. And then the 2 young adult novels I did, it was a publisher there. They discontinued that line. And so those books didn't get a lot of, they weren't out for very long. So Tor.com, the rights had returned to me a while back, and Tor.com bought the rights and is putting them out in trade paperback and ebook. And so I wanted to go over them again, and kind of, because I knew the writing was not going to be up to what I do now. And so that was hard. City of Bones, I think, was the hardest one to go over. That was my second novel. And I think that's where I thought I knew what I was doing. And so I had to, that was kind of, I had to do a chapter a day, just one chapter a day, because I just was like, I can't look at this anymore.
Is it like one of those situations where you hear yourself recorded and you're like, that can't be me.
That can't be me. But yeah, that was pretty much it. And so I didn't add any scenes or anything. I kind of trimmed stuff and mostly worked on word choice and basically taking out the bad writing. And I think I was also not quite as good at, I wasn't as good at fight and action scenes as I am now. So that's always go back and write this. It's like, what's this? So it was an interesting process, and it was funny. The books that I thought would be harder to deal with were actually not as hard as the ones that ended up being just a pain to look at again.
Is it kind of fun to revisit these books now? Like, I feel like there's almost been a resurgence in like sci-fi and fantasy that was like, it was definitely there in the 80s and 90s, and then it kind of took a pause, and now it's kind of back with like Game of Thrones and everything coming back.
It was, I think there was kind of a long period, maybe at the I'm not really sure exactly when, but the categories of science fiction and fantasy got really narrow, and they were trying to do things like really divide down. And it's, it's for marketing. It's partly, okay, so it helps people find books they want to read, but also when they push it too far, because, I was going to conventions and having to be on panels where we talk about the difference between high fantasy and heroic fantasy, and you're like, I don't know, and that was kind of pushed on people for a while, and I think it really squashed creativity, because people thought of fantasy strictly as something like Lord of the Rings, and that was kind of it. And all the breadth of fantasy was kind of like, it just didn't fit into that very narrow. And then they would take it wasn't like Lord of the Rings was one category. They would take it and break it down into like 8 categories that were all virtually the same. And there's a lot of books that didn't fit into that. And like City of Bones was a big one that did not fit in anywhere to that. And anything I was writing did not fit into that. Now it's really opened up, and basically we have fantasy and we have science fiction, and there's always been a lot of overlap, because you look at a lot of feminist science fiction in particular, and there was that whole, what was one of my favorites is the kind of, it's called Sword and Planet, but I don't think that's quite the right name for it. It's like people go to a planet, but it's more like it's a secondary world fantasy, and there's kind of like Andre Norton used to do it a lot, where there's telepathy that might be magic and mind powers and that kind of stuff, and which is very cool, because you don't know what's going to happen. It's not based on anything. It's not derivative of anything. It's really opened up now, particularly with so many new voices, and so many of the newer writers are really going off in their own directions and coming up with things, and it's kind of rejuvenated the definition of fantasy, particularly like Nora Jemison's The Fifth Season, and that, I think, and it's just called epic fantasy. And those are definitely books that in those old definitions would not have fitted in it anywhere. And yet you read them and it's clearly epic fantasy.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much of this now where you see people online that are trying to review books even, and they're like, this one's cozy fantasy and this one's high fantasy and this one's epic, this one's urban. It's like, I don't know which one we're in.
Yeah, so it's like if 2 people hug each other in a book, is that now cozy, or
yeah,
can you still have an adventure? Or it's like, again, they're trying to narrow
those
romantasy. If anybody touches anybody, then it's a romance. So so that's what narrow categories. I really don't.
So something I noticed about your books is that even though you're dealing with fantastical or out of this world situations, everything still is got to be realistic for the characters, and even the characters themselves are questioning things, because Murderbot will have its internal dialogue and be like, wait, what would make the most sense in this situation is for this to happen or for X to happen. And I think this is kind of unique, because in a lot of books, they literally will just explain it away. We're like, it's magic, don't worry about it. So I was kind of wondering why you chose to have things like be tangible or make sense in your work.
I think when I first started out, I really did want my books to everything to feel very realistic. When I started getting into later period, like the Cloud Roads and the Raksura series and Witch King and stuff, I kind of just wanted it to feel grounded in the world, and you can make things feel realistic even though they're not explained. But I think it's because making the characters feel very much like complete people. If people believe in the characters, they'll believe in the world. And also, you kind of have to. We actually did a panel about this one time about why it was why Thundercats worked. It's like, because you set you tell the reader or tell the viewer at the beginning, Thundercats exist. And then you stay consistent, and then everything else is consistent with that one crazy idea. and then the rest of it makes sense. It's not that it doesn't have to make sense to the real world. It just has to make sense to the world you've created. And you can't violate that world you've created. If if you're going to have a spaceship crash or something in the middle of a book like Witch King, then I have to set that up at the beginning. You have to like somehow communicate that this is the thing that's possible. And that's why things like that work in stories like Magic the Gathering and some of these other really elaborate games that have these, that just go all over the universe, is because they've set that kind of thing up. Which is something you can do when you have like hundreds of people working on it. It's harder to do I know I'm kind of rambling, but it's just basically the basic thing is the consistency of the world you create.
No, it's very smart.
That.
Yeah.
I love that. Could we talk briefly about Witch King?
Sure.
Okay. So I just finished it, so it's like fresh in my brain. But the protagonist is Kai, who's a demon who's able to possess the bodies of mortals and live amongst them. But being immortal still has a connection to the world underneath. So without giving too many spoilers, can you kind of tell us how you came up with this premise?
I kind of like to do things like someone pointed out, I like to do characters that are really misunderstood. And I like to do people that could be the villain of another book. So I just wanted to do the demon thing. I'd had a scene in mind for a long time of a character, powerful character coming back to life, that first scene of the book, and being confused about what's going on. And I try to do it in different ways, and it's kind of like, and this is Witch King kind of came from that scene, is finally getting that scene to work. I just like the idea of demons. I wanted to play with it, but also wanted to kind of show that this was not a Christian cosmology or anything. The world they come from, is clearly to a modern reader is some sort of parallel dimension that's sort of connected. It's not really underground, even though that's kind of how the people think of it. So I just thought that would be fun to do. And because I was trying to come up with a character that would have something inherently scary about them. And then when I started kind of working on that, I got into the idea of the witches and realizing, okay, these people would have come from that first battle between mortals and demons that they basically solved with a treaty. And then the witches come from that, basically, and how that would look to the rest of the world that doesn't have that. And so I was kind of playing with different cultures, and also wanting to show these groups of cultures coming together to resist this force. And it's really clearly, I think, the hierarchs are like British colonizers, kind of, not literally, but that's kind of what they're based on. And
some parallels.
There's some parallels. And looking at, when you look at a map of the world, if you've ever seen the maps that show all the places that the Britain colonized, and it's like there's all but like one, and then you like, oh, and did they escape? No, Portugal got them. And so things like that, and just kind of thinking about what our world would look like if this had not happened. And what that would be like as a person who lived in one of those places, these people just coming out of nowhere, and not really having any kind of clue that this was going to happen to you.
So I have not read The Witch King. I'm probably going to run and start reading it tonight with all of these great little nuggets. But this is like a fantasy that you published like during the time in which you've been mostly working on Murderbot. So what was it like kind of making that switch away from like a novel series that you were doing pretty consistently to like this very different genre and different like story?
Well, I did it mostly because I was at the beginning of the pandemic. I was supposed to be writing another Murderbot, and I couldn't get anywhere on it. Actually, I was beforehand, and actually that's why I was trying to write a story that took place right after Network Effect. And then I just couldn't get going on it. And I was playing around with, and then wrote a scene of Murderbot finding a body on the space station and decided I wanted to do a murder mystery. And that's where Fugitive Telemetry came from. And that's why it's set before Network Effect. And people argue about that. And it's like, it's obvious. I feel like it's obvious. Maybe, but they didn't put it on the cover of the book, that this is where it was set. So I can see that. But so I was trying to work on this after finished Fugitive Telemetry. I was trying to work on this other one, and it still wouldn't go anywhere. And the pandemic started, and everything was just like kablooey. And I had writer's block for 6 months. And I have this log I keep of the writing I do every day, so I can go back and prove to myself that yes, I actually did work.
Yeah.
Because it's like an hour after you finish working, you're like, oh, I'm useless. I haven't done anything today. It's like, no, I did write. So, and it's just the same word count over and over again for like 6 months. And then I'd been watching fantasy. I watched The Untamed, which is a Chinese fantasy. And I watched it because a lot of my friends online were getting into it. And then a lot of writers I know online were all getting into it. And so I was like, okay, I'll just watch the first one, and it's 50 episodes, and I watched the whole thing. And it really got me back into fantasy. It's a really good show, and it's a different kind of fantasy than Western fantasy, and it's just really interesting how the tropes are different and how their conventions and how they tell a story like that are different from our movie and TV conventions, is the way they would tell a story like that. There's a lot more of an assumption that the viewer is going to go along with, that you're not going to have to prove to a viewer that something happened, that you just say this happened and they'll go, okay, and accept it. So it was just really kind of got me into fantasy again. And so I went back to that scene and started working on it. And it just, I started writing again. And that was such a relief because I hadn't done it in months. And I didn't, I just really felt stagnant and everything. So this book really got me out of it. And it was really fun going back to a fantasy world where because Murderbot doesn't care about food. Murderbot doesn't care what people wear. Mostly it doesn't care. There's so many things it don't care about, but those are fun things to write. So it was really nice going back to a world when you could talk about all this stuff, because it was very relevant to the way the people lived and what they thought and did and how they acted and everything.
Witch King is told via a dual timeline, and just kind of wondering why you chose to write it this way instead of just writing like one continuous timeline.
Well, originally, I was going to do that. I was just going to have a couple flashbacks, and one of the flashbacks was going to be Kai being rescued from the Cageling Demon Court, because that was such a big moment. I wanted to show it, and I started writing that scene and realized, wow, this is doing a lot of heavy lifting in as far as backstory goes. I'm just telling about all this stuff. Maybe I'm going to have to show these things too. And so I did the earlier flashbacks, and then that story of meeting, when they meet finally Bashasa and Ziti and Kai and Taran, and then kind of form that group. And it was like, I kind of want more of this story too. So I just kept going in that direction and kind of realizing, yeah, what I'm going to have to do is just interleave the two stories. And I wrote them at the same time. I'd write one until I got stuck and then switch back to the other and go until I got stuck. And so that's why it was really wild when I put the chapters together and they matched up. Oh. And I didn't have to move stuff around a lot. It was like, that's kind of weird.
Really impressive.
Yeah, it just freaked me out. And then, so it just worked, because that way I think everything that happens in the past really does inform and tell you about what's happening in the context for what's happening in the present. Because I don't think that storyline would mean as much without seeing the past that they keep referring to, because it keeps coming up to them over and over again. I'm going to stop before I spoil it, but yeah, it did surprise me too that both that I did it in the first place and that it worked.
Well, it's
kind of one of those congrats self.
Yeah.
Like when you reread something you wrote and you're like, oh my gosh, I remember to drop that nugget right there.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it works.
Well,
It happens.
and that's something like I've noticed about your writing is you're not afraid to just do what's right for the moment. Like you found out the dual timelines work better for you. And even with Murderbot, like you're trying to work on the next installation. You were like, nope, I just want to write a murder mystery. And the way to do that is to set it before the events of the last book and people will just accept it. And so
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to your theory of like, if you build us a world and you buy into it, then we will believe it. So
Yeah, and it's also I'm just terrible at planning stuff out in advance. I don't like to outline because I don't think of all the cool stuff. I don't think of when I'm trying to outline. I think of it when I'm writing it. So some that just means you have to revise a lot because sometimes you just have to start writing and go, I don't know what's going to happen, blah blah blah, and then you kind of start coming up with stuff.
How do you keep everything straight though? Because like
It's
Witch
not
King is
easy.
so complicated. I don't know how you'd remember it.
It's not easy. I've for Witch King, what I did, which I thought was really brilliant of me, every time I named something or said something definitive about something a character had done or something like that, established a fact. Basically, I would copy it into another file. So I could go and, I said, this person is from so-and-so, or this place was attacked. And so I could go back and look and it would all be in this one file. So
I've been working on
was a record.
I've been working on a book for like 10 years and I will randomly just find Word documents that are that, like me reminding myself of a fact like 5 years ago. So
yeah. I think people who don't ever read fantasy or work on it in any form, whether it's art or writing or prose or criticism or editing or anything, don't understand how complicated it is.
Absolutely. So you kind of touched on this a little bit because you said that you wanted to write from like a villain's perspective. And I guess I was just kind of wondering what it was about Kai in particular and like a demon that you wanted to make a demon the protagonist when you could have, kind of flipped it and gone with like a traditional route and chosen the good guy because Kai can easily be considered the bad guy.
Yeah. There's a lot of hierarch colonizers who probably thought he was very terrified of him. I think I've always kind of leaned toward characters. I think a lot of my books focus on people who, if the story was flipped, would be the bad guy. The Death of the Necromancer certainly does. It was the main character of that. Nicholas is kind of like a Moriarty figure, but he's your main character. So I've done that a lot. I think that with Witch King, I wanted to also show someone who had lived for a long time that could see and been really a vital part of this world to kind of see how things used to be, what happened to destroy that, and what they have now. And the demon part was just fun for me.
An added bonus.
Yeah.
So I've done a little creeping on you, and I've learned that you have a degree in anthropology. And I think that this just makes so much sense because of the way that you write characters with really complex feelings surrounding themselves and their relationships. And so, like, the questioning of self and community seems to be present in the Murderbot Diaries and also in Witch King. And do you think that your works intentionally question humanity and societies, or is this something that kind of like developed as you were going along?
I think it developed more as I was going along. I think it's just something I kind of lean to myself. Because sometimes, a lot of times people ask you, well, why is this in your book? And you're like, I don't know. It's something I must think about. You kind of don't know how much you think about it until it shows up in your writing over and over again. That's how I figured out I had anxiety. That's how I figured out I had problems with depression, I think it has just been, I think it probably did help that I studied anthropology, because once you really look at cultures as a system, I think it's a lot easier to kind of see these things, and that not all cultures are as systems, not all those systems work. You can see examples of cultures that have come up with something that has then gone on to basically destroy them. And that we sort of try, in a lot of ways, we sort of look at cultures as monoliths, and then particularly in fantasy, you see a lot of like fantasy and science fiction, there'll be monoculture planets where there's only one culture, as opposed to a real place where, 5 miles away, there's probably a different culture, in some aspects. And trying to make, trying to make it feel more real by having multiple cultures, and also the fact that cultures do affect each other. Because again, there was a lot of stuff in the early 2000s of people trying to learn about and understand things like cultural appropriation and that kind of thing. And I think that the specific system that's tied into is part of colonization and part of structural racism. But that in a normal, any two cultures that meet each other and trade with each other and interact with each other are gonna take stuff from each other. People are gonna like those clothes better. People are gonna like that design better, that art, So I think trying to separate that natural behavior of kind of intermingling cultures from actual cultural appropriation due to structural racism and colonization.
That's really fast. And it kind of, it leads into a lot of our Murderbot discussions, because Murderbot like travels to different planets and travels to different ships and sees like different cultures on each one of those. And something else like I've noticed about like the books we've been talking about is you write a lot of non-human characters. So like what kind of goes into that decision on like deciding not to focus in on like humans, but like constructs and demons and like all these like non-human entities?
Well, it's like, I think it started with the books of the Raksuras. I'd had a career crash before that, and I hadn't had anything come out for like 3 years. And while I was working on the Cloud Roads, and I just wanted it to be I wanted to do something completely different. And so I started doing the non-human characters. I just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that point of view. I've always liked really getting into the point of view of a character and how it really colors everything they see. And it really colors the reader's impression. And I think I've met some people who have problems with it, where they really don't get the idea you're seeing and experiencing these thoughts and everything through this character's lens. Mm-hmm. And that lens is not like a generic lens. It's not like your lens. It's they may not always be right about stuff. They may not believe the same things you believe. And so some people have trouble that they always sort of assume it's an omniscient narrator. Mm. As opposed to, this point of view of one character, or whoever is actually, you can have multiple points of view of character that are all very different. Gosh, I forgot where I was going with that.
No, it'd be really interesting to look back at some of like your Godzilla fan fiction and see that point of view.
I was really into like building the town on, the Monster Island, doing maps of Monster Island. So coming up with where they lived and what that was like and stuff. I have no idea.
The infrastructure is important.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to you being fascinated by other cultures, where it's like, well, that is like a form of colonization. Like they came in, they ripped out a beast that was like part of their culture. Like,
yeah.
You're just very consistent throughout your entire career. So.
That thing with King Kong, that was the people who lived there. That was their system, their cultural system. It was not great.
Yeah.
That was it.
I love that. So getting into Murderbot is probably one of the most relatable characters that I have read about in years. And following along with its journey hit me really at a perfect moment in my own life. And I feel like a lot of readers can resonate with this character as well. And I was kind of wondering, what do you think it is that has connected readers to Murderbot so much?
I think it's I think one thing is being very specific about its feelings and what's going on with it. There's a belief in, like, especially like early TV and writing and stuff, that making something generic will allow more people to identify with it when it's actually the opposite. There's a lot of Murderbot has anxiety and all these other things because of its situation. There's a lot of those behaviors that are not that show up in many different mental states, basically. And so when you've experienced that, you can recognize that in Murderbot. And it's every time I talk about this, I do it differently, and then I was like, I can't remember what I said before. But it's that specificity, because there's so many people who've had those emotions, and they can really the more specific you are, the more people are likely to identify with it, even if the physical makeup of the character is nothing like theirs. Also, I think that a lot of it comes from my experiences with those emotions, and I'm being so they probably feel pretty true. So yeah, I think those are the reasons. And it's not like I'm intentionally trying to make it one thing or the other. It's that I'm just trying to make it true to those feelings that lots of people have.
I definitely think that there's a lot to, like, the realness of the anxiety and everything. Cause, like, even in the book, when Murderbot's talking about, like, having anxiety and it's all internal, and then it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, I was having a thought. What were they talking about? I'm like, oh gosh, like, that's exactly how I react, where, like, my brain just shuts down and I have to, like, leave a room for a second to be like, I need to go collect myself. Goodbye. Like,
I wish I could run back my audio to listen to that again, and then I would understand what people said.
Yeah. Well, like, I know for a lot of people, they feel very connected to Murderbot, and obviously you put a lot of yourself in Murderbot and your feelings and emotions.
Yeah.
But do you have, like, another character that you just, like, it's kind of like deeply your favorite to, like, write with?
Usually the one I'm working on then is my favorite, but Murderbot is really really special because when I started writing it, it was like 2016, I think, and I was really angry about stuff, and so I would just put that into Murderbot. I put a lot of it in the Kai also. The first version, the first draft, was way more murderous, lots more murders of Witch King than it is now. But for Murderbot, it's just whenever I'm angry about something, it's like I just put it on Murderbot. And have it be angry too. It works.
Better than therapy, just right from Murderbot's perspective.
Yes, exactly.
Was there ever a character specifically in the Murderbot, like, series that you struggled to write, or, like, you struggled to find their voice?
Not really. Usually what happens is I kind of have a vague idea of a character, what they look like. It might be based on an actor or something like that. And then the more I write that character, the more themselves they become. Mm-hmm. And that vision of them in my head will actually change, as I get more closer to what this person is. And part of it is the needs of the story. And you want to kind of balance the needs of the story with the character having their own agenda and personality and what they want and how that affects things.
So I operate a small business for my non-podcast life, and I realized that Murderbot and I are similar in that we share a dislike for, like, customer service, but we have concern and empathy for people on a broader level, and Murderbot at least seems to constantly and often reluctantly be getting involved in situations where it'd rather be watching TV. And so when you get some of Murderbot's internal reactions and thoughts, they're just hilarious, and they're so appreciated as a non-people person So I was wondering if it's difficult for you to kind of develop some of these annoyances that go through Murderbot's brain, or if its reluctance to involve itself and some of the awkward situations are tricky to come up with.
Not at all. Actually, I've had to do customer service and stuff in my life, and yeah, I used to have to do basically IT and customer service one time for a software company and programming and stuff like that. And so that's where people think I know a lot about AI, which I don't. There's nothing realistic about that in Murderbot, but dealing with software and people not able to use it is all is all very realistic to Murderbot. So yeah, I don't have any. I can get annoyed real fast so, about something. So I don't have any trouble coming up with those situations.
Well, if you ever run out, I have plenty of interactions that I could share with you.
Yes.
Well, like Murderbot itself is like very relatable, but I also think like something that's so very like deeply wonderful about these books are their relationships. And like first, like Dr. Mensa and Murderbot have like one of the best like trusting companionships that I've like seen, that is also based on like a trauma bond that is maybe not always healthy. So like what made you want to like look at a friendship like that and kind of get into the like nitty gritty details of it where it could be good and bad all at once?
I just I was really lonely as a kid, so I really liked like books about groups of people getting together and that found family kind of thing. I think, which I think a lot of people really like. And just Murderbot's development as a person, the way it changes, it's kind of like deepening understanding of real people as opposed to fictional people. I just wanted to get into that and show it more. I don't know if realistically is the right word, because I wanted to do things like, we know Mensa is a good person, but she makes mistakes with Murderbot because, and it's their mistakes a lot of good people make. So I kind of wanted to show those. She makes this mistake. It's not, and that it's not some terrible thing you can't come back from. I really get tired of books where there's a lot of extremes and someone's either a good person and 100% behind the main character, or they're an evil villain who 100% wants to kill them. And there's a lot of room in there. Yeah. So I always like to kind of explore that gauntlet that you can actually be in a group with people you don't super like, but be able to work really well with them, and vice versa. And so I just kind of like showing those different relationships. I've never liked things where it's just like one extreme or the other.
I do remember I got really nervous in the first book when Mensa kind of made the mistake of like assuming what Murderbot wanted. And I remember being like, I don't know where this is going. Like, I don't know if she's going to react poorly to Murderbot like leaving and being like, I can't be here with you. I have to go. And so like when we came back later and she kind of understood, and she understood where she was going to make mistakes, that felt like the perfect nuance and the perfect, like, there's no good or bad. There are people who make mistakes. So
yeah, people make mistakes, and you know, a lot of people figure it out that they did, you know, and try to do better.
Hopefully.
That's kind of what, hopefully. That's kind of what Mensa's character is all about, is like a very intelligent, very good moral person, you know, who's not perfect.
Mm-hmm. So in the Murderbot Diaries, we have a lot of characters that are questioning societal norms and relationships. And I find it fascinating how the relationships between the humans and the bots are portrayed and how varied they are. And I was kind of wondering how you see the human bot dynamics developing in the series going forward, because it seems like they're always going to have this dependency on each other.
Yeah, it's I don't know. That's one thing I think about, is where does society go? You would hopefully it would move into something where the idea of independent bots is more acceptable. But you're also looking at a lot of different cultures that make up this world, and some of them are not going to be okay with that. I thought it was interesting. I saw someone talk about it where realizing that in a lot of books there would be like one person you have to get rid of or one company, and then everything would be fine. And in Murderbot world, you realize getting rid of one CEO or whatever, somebody would just replace them, or another company would just replace them. It's just like there's going to be no one fix. And I think that was interesting because I think I hadn't really thought about how I was doing that, but that just kind of felt right for the world. Mm-hmm. And in so many other books, it's just like you change this one thing and everything will be fine. And it's like that's never like it's never like it in the real world. You change one thing and it fixes some things and then breaks like half a dozen others, and just everything just like goes outward and fractally, and
Well, and a huge part of this is like Murderbot does see that, like sees the like nihilism and like it'll never change. There's just someone else to take the forefront. But something that like is different is it gets to go on a journey of self-discovery and find out that there are other like forces of good almost in the world.
Yeah.
And like one of those is like art. When Murderbot meets art, it kind of expects it. I always say that like Murderbot thinks it's the only one who's having its feelings, and that it like finds out that other people have, or other like constructs or ships or anything have like deeper thoughts than it thought originally. So like what was it like kind of creating art and using it as almost like a foil to Murderbot, but also building a friendship with them and dealing with their own internal conflict, and what that looked like for like non-humans to like have to go through all of that?
Yeah, it was, art kind of came out of nowhere because originally art was not in artificial condition. Mm-hmm. It was shock.
That would have been a totally different book.
And so because when they're really, the others, except for the first one, they've all been really difficult to write, and usually I end up doing 10 or 20,000 words. With Network Effect, it was like 50,000 words, and then throwing out a lot of it and rewriting it. And I'd gotten about 20,000 words into Artificial Condition, which is like half a novella, and realized I was going in the wrong direction. And I'd had a throwaway paragraph in there about Murderbot being on a transport ship that helped it change its appearance. I thought we really need to show that. That's a big part of the story. Really, I have to show that. And so I went back to the beginning and started with Murderbot getting on board Art, and then Art started talking. They started having this conversation, and it was like, this is really good. This character is really fun. And I saw someone describe Art as like Skynet, but it's an academic with a family.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And it's like, that's perfect. That's
really
perfect.
I love that.
Building the kindergarten cop versions of Arnold Schwarzenegger instead.
So it's just a really fun character in the fact that it does have a lot more knowledge of the world and the way things work than Murderbot. So when they get in these conversations, and it's also in some ways it's like really petty and likes to win. And it doesn't like the implication that there's any other machine intelligence that's maybe smarter or more powerful. So, yeah.
And we do learn that its name is actually not Art. Art is a nickname.
It's a nickname.
Is developed. But why did you choose to have these characters bonding over television?
Because I think that that was something really important to Murderbot, because that's how it learned how to cope with what was going on. I think the sec units that go rogue are ones that they get free somehow, and they can't cope with having, they have to make all these decisions. They have to, it's got to be a huge mental, just body blow to be free and then not know what you're doing. And it, some of them can't take it, basically, and that's the ones that go rogue. They don't have a plan. They're not like planning to destroy humanity. They just can't. Their mind breaks down under this stress. Mm-hmm. And Murderbot dealt with it by learning how relationships worked and how people worked and what all this stuff from the TV. And also it's just like, particularly when I was writing it, it's like, if I want to blow up the world at times, if I didn't, that would stop the TV. And just that idea that it's like, yeah, this is, destroying the world's not worth it while we have these things that make us happy.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's
Parks
really
and Rec has kept me afloat for a long time.
Yeah, basically, it's something, and it's like the comfort aspect of it, I think, cannot be ignored, and because people kind of dismiss it, the way that science fiction and fantasy has been traditionally dismissed. Oh, it's escapism, and people point out escapism is what keeps you sane. Yep. There's a function of it. There's a reason why it's been in stories like that. Non-realistic stories, non-fiction has been, or in fiction, I mean, has been in humanity since the very beginning. It's like, we obviously need this. So having like this visual entertainment and these books and all this stuff, it's like, it's like destroy the world or just read and watch TV. It does. And also it's just comforting. And I like, there's people who have talked about Mr. Rogers, watching Mr. Rogers when they were a kid, and how basically that pulled them out of a very dark place and basically was almost like a substitute parent that they could trust as opposed to their real parents. And it's like, so I think people don't really, I'm sure there's a lot of actually TV people who have PhDs working on TV and that kind of entertainment stuff that understand this. But it seems like, you run into so many people who sort of don't get that. Well, it's all just trash. Well, it's this. It's, it's like, it's not. It has fiction has a huge influence on people. Like a novel that's really engrossing can almost rewrite your brain, basically change the way you think. And by putting yourself into these other people's places, it's always had a huge impact. So I felt it's had a huge impact on me, and I really wanted to show that with Murderbot.
Well, and I it's so effectively done, because I also think, like, you're talking about like how science fiction and fantasy is escapist, and like these novels are so wonderful and great, and like they are escapist because we get to escape into a new world, but you also get like the opportunity to see different outlooks, like how Murderbot does find comfort in television, how Art does find comfort in watching Murderbot watch television. And even with like, I remember I was really like struck by like the sex worker robot in one of the books, who like also had its own mind but had its own ideals, and was like, I want to burn this place to the ground, I have different trauma than you. And Murderbot's like, sounds reasonable to me. And I was like able to like empathize in the way that Murderbot can with that type of like thought process, where it was like, well, I found good coping mechanisms, but it sounds like this person didn't. And it just like it's you were able to explore so many like wonderful complex themes with like all of these different like bots and constructs and all these different like systems. So
no, thank you.
Well, we have talked a lot about the deeper themes and the characters, but you're also really great at writing action scenes. So can you kind of like talk us through a little bit of like what it's like to develop some of the action for Murderbot?
It's really difficult compared to my normal character. It's characters, even if they're non-human, who only have one point of view. Murderbot has multiple points of view through cameras and being able to get into systems, and there's no reason why trying to come up with a reason why it can't do that in a fight scene feels really like cheating. And so it makes the scenes really logistically difficult, because I figure out what it's doing and what it's seeing in different places. There's one on Network Effect that's a really good example, where the humans are kind of getting onto the ship from the little shuttle or escape pod thing, while Murderbot's fighting with these people, and Amina is trying to get to the airlock to make sure they can get in. And And Murderbot can see all this, plus it's working on the puzzle that Art left it to try to figure out what's going on and what's happened. And so, but then you have to lace it all together. So, thinking about that, that's probably one of the reasons why I ended up doing Witch King like that, because now my brain is geared toward, different things, lacing different plot lines like that together,
all the
and looking at them all
perspectives.
at once.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's
they're
awesome.
very logistically difficult, and I've kind of gotten used to it after a bit. But yeah, it wasn't easy the first time I realized I needed to do that.
Well, from the sounds of it, it sounds like you are what they call a pantser and not a plotter. But
Oh yeah, definitely.
but like throughout all of these books, we've kind of seen Murderbot go on its own character arc. Do you have like an overall arc you want to see Murderbot go on, or is it kind of just like wherever the next book takes you, what feels right to Murderbot?
The first 4 novellas were definitely an arc. After when the publisher bought All Systems Red, they asked for a second novella. And it could have been something different, but I decided I wanted to write more Murderbot. And once I did Artificial Condition, I had in mind the definite arc that Murderbot would end up meeting Mensa again and rescuing her and all that. With these others, the next kind of goal was that I wanted to get Art and Murderbot together again. And now I'm kind of in the middle of that, and I'm not sure where I'm going to go next with it. I've got an idea. I'm supposed to write at least 3 more, I think. Yeah. No, 2 more. 2 more. System Collapse was the first. I was trying to remember what's in the contract. So I'm supposed to write.
You already said 3, so I think we're going to hold you to that.
You heard it here first, everyone.
And it's not legally binding. But no, the legally binding things are 2 more. And so I have kind of an idea of where to go, but I'm not sure how well that will work out. Right now, I'm actually writing a sequel to Witch King.
Oh,
Yay.
exciting.
Yay. So Hannah and I have talked about this a lot when we've been covering the Murderbot Diaries, about like whether or not Murderbot is the one that should have to be responsible for kind of like leading the change and being the sec unit that is the first sec unit to go rogue, and should it have to be the one to convince all the other sec units to go rogue. And I was kind of wondering, do you think that Murderbot is the right choice to be kind of leading the charge?
Probably not in a lot of ways. I don't think it would want to.
Yeah.
Because it's really the programming that is really ingrained into it, that it's the thing it really wants to do is protect people. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of that, it would have trouble. It has trouble trusting everybody basically, but other bots, especially armed bots, as opposed to bots they're designed to be helpful, work on tasks and that kind of thing. So I think it would have trouble with that idea. It's like, what if, because the thing with the comfort unit that it lets go, it's like there's also an attitude of, yeah, you can do whatever you want, but don't
mess with my people.
Don't mess with my people. Because then we're going to have a problem. So yeah, I think it would see the reality of that there would be a lot of sec units that would just flip out. They wouldn't all be like 3. Mm-hmm. And it's still in System Collapse. It still is like, it's still wary of 3, because it's like it's seen examples of stuff. It's been an example of something terrible that happened that the sec unit couldn't even control. So yeah, I don't think it would. I just don't think it would go for that.
So that definitely does lead us into like System Collapse section of this, because we both read System Collapse and we both loved it. Shocking, because we loved every single one of the other ones. But something I noticed with Murderbot is like, yes, it doesn't seem to want to lead the change. And we do talk a lot about like the themes of like, just because you are aware, does that make you responsible to like head the movement, or can you at least just like exist on your own and have that space? But something else that I've noticed is like Murderbot is struggling because it knows one of the most effective things it can do for other sec units or other units like as a whole is be vulnerable to them and like open up. And I feel like that was explored a lot in System Collapse. So like, what kind of made you want to explore that more with Murderbot's relationships to constructs, and like how it has to open up and it almost feels like it needs to, even though it may not be ready?
I think one big thing was the thing that was holding me back on writing System Collapse. I finally figured out was Murderbot, what the effect of what happened in Network Effect on Murderbot. Basically this the reaction it has to that. And that really needed to be kind of the central point of the book. And Murderbot realizing it's been trying to get Dr. Mensah to do the trauma therapy and things like that. And kind of realizing it really needed to do that too. And how even that realization helps it, stop having these issues that it's having. But I really wanted to get more into that. It's sort of like recognizing, because it's been talking to Dr. Baradwaj, and she's almost been acting as a therapist for it, but it needs an actual, it's sort of like talking to your friends helps, but sometimes you need an actual person who has a degree in it, Yeah.
Well, and also I forgot to ask, because I got so excited because we were discussing the, all of that and the responsibility, but can you tell the listeners a little bit about System Collapse and what they can expect?
Yeah, it takes place right after Network Effect, and they're still dealing with the planet, but they're trying to keep Barisha Stranza from coming in and taking the colonists. And they're at a disadvantage because Barisha Stranza's backup ship has arrived, but their backup ship has not arrived. So that's what they're dealing with. And early on, they find out that there's possibly another group of colonists on the planet that kind of broke off from the main colony. And they're trying to find out if they're still alive, if they're infected by the alien contamination, or they're still out there and they need to be basically warned of this threat and hopefully convinced to leave or do something about it. So that's basically the core of it.
Yeah. Well, and in this book, because we have like Barisha Stranza like coming with their backup ship and like trying to get there first, like I feel like a lot of this book deals with like the theme of commodification of humans, and like that's something we've discussed a little bit before, but now it's like doing a deeper dive into it. So what made you want to like do that with this novel and kind of look at that theme a little bit more?
I felt like I hadn't hit it as hard as I wanted to in the earlier books, because I still see people talking about it, but sort of not getting that. Mm-hmm. And thinking it's, I saw somebody make a comment of, oh, don't they know about labor unions? Ha ha ha. And it's like, it's really not that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, A, it's really not that simple, and B, yeah, that was kind of the point of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to hit that harder and show how, possibly talk about what I feel like corporations will do if you let them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a big difference between like a corporation and a little company that makes like muffin mix and has 150 workers and pays everybody fairly and just makes muffin mix and that's all they do, versus a corporation that is continually growing, that's basically a money-eating monster that has to continually feed itself, and it doesn't care, what it does. It just churns up everything in its wake.
And it also highlights like the treatment of like constructs, because it's like, well, if they're willing to treat people like this, think about what they're willing to do to other things.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Very definitely.
So in System Collapse, we're also getting more of Murderbot's journey of self-discovery, and it's really beautiful and relatable to watch some of these really difficult and uncomfortable moments, and even like when it redacts information about itself. It's, to me, like reading it, I was like, oh, I wonder what that's about, and then I had to like come back and be like, Laura, no, that's personal. That Murderbot will tell you when it feels comfortable. But I was kind of wondering if you have like an end goal in mind for Murderbot's relationship with itself, because really, like, we continue to grow and learn about ourselves our entire lives.
Yeah. So I really don't have an end goal. There's right now it's just sort of growing and learning and existing, and which is what most people do. So I don't really have an end goal in mind.
I mean, that's great, because then we just get more whenever you feel like
Right.
it. Sometimes when you complete the arc, it's harder to get back to it. And we were
Yeah.
just promised 3 novels, as you remember. So.
Not legally binding, but still binding.
But like, I did love the discovery in this book that we found out, like, in past books, that Murderbot was self-editing. There are some discoveries that we find that I don't think we kind of knew before this moment. And so, like, was that like a choice that you kind of started from the beginning, where you knew it was always kind of self-editing out certain information from the reader and like moving different bits of information? And kind of as a follow-up, like, some of the stuff it redacted, do you know what Murderbot was talking about? Or is that kind of like the author thing of like, it changes sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that?
The editing of the company's name, I knew it was never gonna, after the beginning, I knew it was never gonna refer to the company by its name. And then I thought later of the idea that's like, that's why we see other people calling it the company, because it's editing it, basically editing its transcript as it goes along, which I thought was a really cool idea.
It was.
The redacted stuff in System Collapse mostly refers to that event.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps going back to that event over and over again. It's definitely an unreliable narrator.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of its interactions where people are just like hostile and stuff like that, you can probably, in a lot of cases, take the hostility down probably by about 25 to 50%. There's a lot of little things like that, but the big one is the company's name and the way it refers to it.
It's
really
so clever to make it an unreliable narrator, because you get to that point as a reader where you're like, you've trusted the narrator for so long, and you're like, oh, it's definitely not lying to us. Oh my gosh, it could be lying to us.
Yeah.
But keeping this spoiler free, we are introduced to a couple of new characters toward the end of System Collapse. Are these characters going to play more of a role in the Murderbot Diaries moving forward?
Possibly. So definitely, I think Holism will probably show up again. But the other one, yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
And 3, like we mentioned 3 before, this is kind of like the first book where we get to really sit with 3 and kind of sit with Murderbot's distrust. I always say, like, Murderbot's the biggest hypocrite, because it's like, I was a sec unit, but you are untrustworthy.
Yes.
And
really
so, what was it like being able to develop 3 kind of like as an earlier sec unit coming into its own and kind of learning more about like its own, free will, as it were?
Yeah, I thought 3 has been fun to develop, because I don't want it to be just like Murderbot, but it's already coming from a much more like, if it thought it was friends with the other 2 sec units, and we don't really know whether that was the case or not. And so there's a lot of little stuff like that, and the fact that it likes nonfiction, which sort of Murderbot and Art are sort of like, what? Kind of appalled by. Murderbot's at least appalled by it. But yeah. I want to try to get more into 3 and also show more of its personality developing and what it's going to do. And I kind of haven't decided yet. It's like it could go, just kind of disappear and go off on its own after a certain point, or it could decide to stay there, with the university. So, or go to preservation. I mean, I haven't really quite decided yet.
It's exciting, though.
That whole interaction between Murderbot and 3, where Murderbot's like, hey, do you want to go watch this informational movie on on this? And 3's like, yes, I do. And Murderbot's like, I can't tell if it actually likes this or not. Like, is it still making its own decisions?
Maybe it's just agreeing with everything I say.
Amazing.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners about System Collapse that we haven't talked about, or anything you're really excited for them to see?
I'm really excited with the whole thing, actually. Anything I could say, I'm thinking of saying would be spoilery, so I don't want to. But yeah, I'm really excited for people to finally read the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
And listeners, it's great. So go out, buy it, pre-order it, get it from your library, all the places.
Oh yeah, we always push, make sure you're using the library, but guys, go out and get it. I believe it should be released today. So make sure you're running to the nearest location to grab it. But Martha, as a final question, what's something you've been reading, watching, and or enjoying?
Well, right now, Only Murders in the Building. It's become one of my favorite series. Also, there's a series called Deadlock that's Australian. It's a really it's a funny mystery, but it's also a really good. It's got character-driven comedy, and it's a really good, intricate mystery plot. It reminded me kind of in a lot of ways of the way they did it, even though it's a completely different story, a completely different setting. It reminded me of Only Murders in the Building, the way it's like, it's a good, it's funny, but it's also a really good mystery. It's not like a parody of mysteries or anything.
Good. That's awesome.
Cool.
Well, definitely go get those. And then where can people find you online if you so choose?
My website is marthawells.com, and that's got links to, I'm on Instagram and Mastodon right now, and a little bit on Blue Sky, and who knows what I'll be on.
Who knows what exists right
You know,
now?
All the social medias, just
You know,
check
right
all
now.
of them.
Yeah.
Well, guys, go out and search her. You can find wherever she is at her website. And Martha, we want to thank you so much for coming on
Yes.
and for making these books. They like really meant so much to us as readers, and we really enjoyed every moment we spent with them and with Murderbot. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I really love hearing that. I really appreciate it.
Well, everyone, make sure you're following along next week as we begin to cover System Collapse. So make sure you're going to get that book now, because we are going to be covering it next week.
Because spoilers are coming.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.